The town of Blackidge didn't forgive. It sat at the edge of the Mojave like a scar, a collection of sun-bleached buildings and people whose ideas about right and wrong had calcified in the heat. If you showed up with the wrong last name, the wrong story, or, God forbid, the wrong circumstances, you learned real quick that mercy wasn't part of the local vocabulary. Eliza Hart learned that on her first day. She'd arrived on a Thursday morning in late March, stepping off a westbound freight with nothing but a canvas bag and a belly that announced her condition to anyone with eyes. 6 months along, maybe 7. Hard to tell under the loose dress she wore, but not hard enough. People noticed. They always noticed. She walked down Main Street like she had a right to be there, which was her first mistake. The second mistake was asking for help. "Looking for work," she'd said to the woman behind the counter at Miller's General Store. "Can cook, clean, mend. Good with numbers if you need bookkeeping." The woman, Mrs. Miller, though Eliza didn't know that yet, had looked at her the way you'd look at a stray dog that wandered onto your porch. Not quite disgust, not quite pity. Something in between. "We don't have anything," she'd said. "I can start today. Won't need much in wages, just, we don't have anything." Firmer this time. Final. Eliza had nodded, picked up her bag, walked out. She tried 6 more places that day. The restaurant said they'd just hired someone. The boarding house said they were full. The church, and this one stung, said they'd pray on it and get back to her. Nobody got back to her. By evening, she was sitting on a bench outside the post office trying to figure out her next move. Her feet ached. Her back ached. The baby was doing somersaults against her ribs, which meant she'd have to find a bathroom soon. And the thought of asking one more person for one more favor made her want to lie down in the dirt and quit. But quitting wasn't in her nature. Never had been. "You lost?" The voice came from her left. A man in his 60s, rail thin, with a face like old leather and eyes that held a kind of wary curiosity. "No," Eliza said. "Just resting." "You're that woman came in on the freight." It wasn't a question. "That's me." He studied her for a moment. Then he sat down on the other end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Bill," he said. "I run the feed supply down the road." "Eliza." "Where you headed, Eliza?" "Here, I guess. Unless someone gives me a reason to keep moving." Bill glanced at her belly, then away. "Town's not friendly to strangers." "I noticed. Especially strangers in your situation." Eliza felt her jaw tighten. "My situation is my business." Didn't say it wasn't. He pulled a pouch of tobacco from his pocket, rolled a cigarette with practiced fingers. "Just saying, you're going to have a hard time finding work here. People talk." "Let them talk. Talk turns into action. You'll be out of options fast." Eliza turned to look at him. "You offering me something, or just listing problems?" Bill lit the cigarette, took a drag. "Neither. Just telling you how it is." "Then why sit down?" He smiled, barely, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "My daughter. She had your kind of spine," he paused. Past tense. Eliza didn't ask. The silence said enough. After a moment, Bill stood up. "There's a ranch about 4 miles west of here, big spread. Owner's name is Caleb Rourke. He doesn't come into town much, but he's always looking for help." "He hiring?" "Didn't say that. Said he's always looking. Difference being, nobody lasts long out there." "Why not?" Bill shrugged. "Man's hard to work for. Lost his family a while back. Hasn't been the same since." "What happened to them?" "Not my story to tell." He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot. "You want directions?" Eliza stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Yeah, I do." The ranch wasn't hard to find. It sprawled across the valley floor like something out of a painting. Rolling pastures, weathered fences, a main house that looked like it had been standing since before the town existed. Cottonwood trees lined the creek that ran along the northern edge of the property, their leaves shimmering in the late afternoon light. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt abandoned. Not literally. There were horses in the corral, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, but there was something hollow about the place, like a body without a pulse. Eliza walked up the long gravel drive toward the main house, her boots kicking up dust with each step. She could feel eyes on her, ranch hands pausing their work to watch the pregnant stranger march up to the boss's door like she had an appointment. She didn't care. The porch was solid wood, worn smooth by years of use. She climbed the 3 steps, crossed to the door, and knocked. Waited. No answer. She knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. "He's not in there." The voice came from behind her. Eliza turned to find a man standing at the base of the porch steps, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that didn't give anything away. Caleb Rourke. Had to be. "I'm looking for work," Eliza said. "Don't need anyone. I can cook, clean, handle livestock if you need it. Got people for that." "Then you've got room for one more." Caleb's expression didn't change. "No. I'll work for less than what you're paying them." Still no. Eliza descended the steps slowly, stopping a few feet away from him. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray starting to thread through his hair. He looked older than he probably was, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. "I don't need charity," she said. "Didn't offer any. I need a job. You run a ranch. That's a transaction, not a handout." "Ranch is full," Caleb said. "Try somewhere else." "There is nowhere else. Not my problem." Eliza felt something crack inside her. Not break, just crack. The kind of fracture that happens when you've been holding yourself together too long and the weight finally gets too heavy. But she didn't cry, didn't beg. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "Fine." Then she turned and walked away. That's it. She didn't go back to town. Instead, she followed the creek north until she found a spot where the cottonwoods grew thick and the water ran shallow enough to wade across. There was a clearing there, sheltered from the wind, with flat ground and dry wood scattered nearby. Good enough. She dropped her bag, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. By nightfall, she had a fire going and a makeshift shelter built from branches and her spare blanket. It wasn't much. Wouldn't hold up in a storm, but it would keep her dry for now. She filled her canteen from the creek, boiled the water over the fire, and ate a tin of beans she'd been saving. Then she sat on a flat rock and stared into the flames. The baby kicked. She put a hand on her belly, feeling the movement beneath her palm. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. She wasn't sure she believed it, but saying it out loud made it feel a little more true. The next morning, she woke before dawn and walked back toward the ranch. Not to the house, to the kitchen building. Most big ranches had them, separate structures where meals were prepared for the hands. This one was a long, low building near the bunkhouse, with a chimney that was already smoking when Eliza arrived. She slipped inside. The cook, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with flour on her apron and irritation on her face, looked up from the biscuit dough she was kneading. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows her way around a kitchen," Eliza said. "You need help?" "I don't need anything except for people to stay out of my space." "You're making breakfast for how many? 20? 30? 23. By yourself?" The woman didn't answer. Eliza crossed to the sink, rolled up her sleeves, and started washing the pile of dirty dishes stacked there. "I didn't say you could. You didn't say I couldn't." The cook stared at her for a long moment. Then she went back to her biscuits. They worked in silence. By the time the hands started filing in for breakfast an hour later, the dishes were clean, the coffee was hot, and Eliza had made a pot of gravy to go with the biscuits. The cook, her name was Martha, Eliza learned later, didn't thank her, but she didn't tell her to leave either. This became the routine. Every morning, Eliza showed up before dawn. She washed dishes, chopped vegetables, stirred pots, and kept her mouth shut. Martha tolerated her presence the way you'd tolerate a persistent fly. Annoying, but not worth the energy to swat. The hands noticed, of course. "Who's the new girl?" one of them asked on the third day. "Not your concern," Martha snapped. "She working here now?" "She's helping, that's all you need to know." But word got around. By the end of the week, everyone on the ranch knew about the pregnant woman camping by the creek who showed up every morning to work for free. Most of them didn't care. A few thought it was strange, and one, Caleb Rourke, didn't say a word about it. Eliza saw him around the property, of course. Hard not to. He was always moving, checking fences, working with the horses, meeting with the foreman about supply orders. He never stopped, never slowed down, and he never looked at her. Not directly. But she caught him watching sometimes, out of the corner of his eye, like he was trying to figure out what game she was playing. She wasn't playing a game, she was surviving. On the 10th day, she made stew. It was a cold morning, the kind where your breath hung in the air and your fingers went numb if you stayed outside too long. Martha had complained all morning about the weather, about her knees, about the fact that the supply wagon was late and they were running low on salt pork. Eliza didn't complain, she just made stew. Used what they had: potatoes, carrots, onions, a little bit of beef. Let it simmer all day so the flavors melded together. By evening, the kitchen smelled like something worth coming home to. She ladled a portion into a tin bowl, covered it with a cloth, and walked up to the main house. Left it on the porch. No note, no explanation. Then she went back to her camp by the creek. The next morning, the bowl was sitting by the kitchen door. Clean, empty. Eliza picked it up, ran her thumb along the rim, and felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but close. She kept doing it. Every night she made something and left it on Caleb's porch. Soup, cornbread, roasted vegetables, whatever she could pull together from the kitchen stores, and every morning the dish came back clean. He never left a note, never said thank you, but he didn't tell her to stop. The hands started to notice. "You sweet on the boss?" one of them asked, a young guy named Danny with more mouth than sense. "No," Eliza said. "Then why you cooking for him special?" "I'm not, I'm just cooking." Danny grinned. "Sure you are." Martha shot him a look that could have curdled milk. "Get out of my kitchen. I'm just saying. Out." He left. Martha turned to Eliza. "Don't listen to them." "I don't." "Good." She paused, then added, "But maybe stop with the porch deliveries. People talk. Let them. You don't understand how this place works." Eliza met her eyes. "I understand fine. I also don't care." Martha sighed. "You're going to make things harder for yourself. They're already hard." 2 weeks passed, then 3. The weather turned colder. Eliza reinforced her shelter, adding more branches and layers to keep the wind out. She washed her clothes in the creek, hung them to dry on a line she'd strung between 2 trees. At night, she sat by her fire and felt the baby move, and wondered how long she could keep this up. Not long, probably, but longer than most people would have managed. One afternoon, she was walking back from the creek with a bucket of water when she heard it. A scream, high-pitched, panicked. Animal. She dropped the bucket and ran. The sound was coming from the eastern pasture, a wide stretch of land bordered by old barbed wire fencing that should have been replaced years ago. By the time Eliza got there, a small crowd had gathered. A colt was tangled in the wire. Young, maybe 6 months old. It must have spooked and run straight into the fence, and now it was caught, thrashing and screaming, cutting itself deeper with every movement. "Someone get the boss!" one of the hands shouted. "We don't have time," another yelled back. "It's going to bleed out." They were standing there, just standing there, watching. Eliza pushed through the group. "Ma'am, you shouldn't—" She ignored him. The colt's eyes were rolling white with terror. Blood streaked its legs where the barbs had dug in. It tried to kick free and only made things worse. Eliza approached slowly, hands out, voice low. "Easy. Easy now." The colt jerked away. I know it hurts. But you've got to let me help you." She moved closer. Closer. The wire was wrapped around the colt's front legs and tangled in its mane. Every piece she tried to loosen seemed to tighten another section. She worked carefully, ignoring the barbs that bit into her own hands, ignoring the blood running down her wrists. The colt screamed again. "I know," Eliza whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Get back." The voice was sharp, commanding. Caleb. He was suddenly there beside her, wire cutters in hand. "Hold him steady," he said. Eliza didn't question it. She wrapped her arms around the colt's neck, holding him as still as she could while Caleb cut the wire away piece by piece. It took 10 minutes. Felt like an hour. When the last strand fell away, the colt staggered back, legs shaking. Caleb caught him before he fell, running his hands over the wounds. "Not as bad as it looks," he said. "Mostly superficial. We'll need to clean them, but he'll be fine." Eliza nodded. Her hands were shaking. Caleb looked at her for the first time, really looked at her, and saw the blood. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "So's he." Caleb's jaw tightened. Come on. It. He led her to the barn. The hands had dispersed, gone back to their work, leaving just the two of them and the injured colt. Caleb tied the animal to a post, then grabbed a medical kit from a shelf on the wall. Sit, he said, pointing to a hay bale. Eliza sat. He knelt in front of her, took her hands in his, and examined the cuts. They weren't deep, mostly scratches, but there were a lot of them. This is going to sting, he said. He poured water over her hands, then rubbed salve into the wounds. His touch was efficient, impersonal, but not unkind. You shouldn't have done that, he said. Someone had to. Could have waited for me. He would have bled out. Caleb didn't respond. He finished wrapping her hands in clean bandages, then stood and moved to the colt. Eliza watched him work, watched the way he gentled the animal, the way his hands moved with practiced precision. You're good with them, she said. Been doing it a long time. How long have you had this place? Long enough? That's not an answer. Caleb glanced at her. You ask a lot of questions. You don't answer a lot of them. Almost. She saw him smile, but it was gone before she could be sure. He finished cleaning the colt's wounds, then straightened. You can't keep camping by the creek. Why not? Winter's coming. You'll freeze. I'll manage. No, Caleb said. You won't. Eliza stood, wiping her hands on her dress. Then what do you suggest? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, there's a room off the kitchen, storage mostly, but it's got a cot and a stove. You can stay there. In exchange for what? Helping Martha. I'm already doing that. Then keep doing it. He paused, and stop leaving food on my porch. Eliza felt something tighten in her chest. Why? Because if you're working here, you eat in the kitchen like everyone else. It took her a moment to understand what he was saying. I'm working here? Unless you've got somewhere better to be. She didn't. Okay, she said. Caleb nodded once, then turned and walked out of the barn. Eliza stood there for a long moment, staring at her bandaged hands. Then she followed him back toward the house. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a narrow cot pushed against one wall and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. There was a single window that looked out over the pasture, a wooden crate that served as a table, and a hook on the back of the door for hanging clothes. It was the best thing Eliza had seen in months. Martha helped her move in, which mostly consisted of carrying her canvas bag from the creek and setting it on the cot. Not much to move, Martha observed. Don't need much. Martha studied her for a moment. You know what you're doing? Working, same as before. That's not what I mean. Eliza met her eyes. I know. The boss doesn't let people in, not anymore. I'm not trying to get in. I'm just trying to survive. Martha nodded slowly. Fair enough. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth. You did good today. With the colt. Thanks. Don't make me regret saying that. Then she was gone. Eliza sank onto the cot, feeling the thin mattress compress under her weight. The baby kicked, hard, and she put a hand on her belly. We made it, she whispered. Not safe, not settled, but closer. What? The days fell into a new rhythm after that. Eliza woke before dawn, started the stove in the kitchen, and had coffee ready by the time Martha arrived. They worked side by side, Martha handling the main meals while Eliza prepped ingredients, washed dishes, and kept the place running. It was hard work, the kind that left your back aching and your feet screaming by the end of the day. But it was honest work, and it was hers. The hands got used to her presence. Most of them ignored her, which was fine. A few, like Danny, tried to make conversation, which she tolerated, and one or two seemed genuinely decent, nodding at her when they came in for meals, saying thank you when she refilled their coffee. Small things, but they mattered. Caleb, though. Caleb was harder to read. He came to the kitchen for breakfast every morning, ate quickly, and left without a word. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not obviously, just those quick glances that said he was keeping track, making sure she was holding up. She never asked why, didn't want to risk the answer. One evening, about a week after she'd moved into the room, she was cleaning up after dinner when Caleb appeared in the doorway. You got a minute? He asked. Eliza set down the plate she was washing. Yeah. He gestured for her to follow him outside. They walked in silence toward the main house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. Caleb stopped on the porch, leaning against the railing. You're doing good work, he said. Thanks. Martha says you're reliable. Is that a compliment from her? Close as you'll get. Eliza smiled despite herself. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then, You planning to stay? Do you want me to? I'm asking what you want. Eliza looked out at the darkening valley. I want to keep working, make some money, figure out what comes next. And the baby? What about it? You've got, what, 2 months left? Maybe 3? Around that. Then what? Eliza turned to face him. Then I figure it out. Same as I've been doing. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You're stubborn. You're observant. It's going to get harder. I know. And when it does, I'll handle it, Eliza said firmly. I appreciate the job. I do. But I'm not looking for someone to take care of me. Didn't say you were. Then why are we having this conversation? Caleb pushed off the railing. Because I don't like surprises. And I need to know if you're going to disappear one day without warning. I won't. How do I know that? Because I just told you. They stared at each other, then Caleb nodded once. Okay. He turned and walked into the house, leaving Eliza standing on the porch alone. She stayed there for a while, watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere inside, she felt something settle. Not hope, not yet, but close. The first snow came early that year. Not much, just a dusting that melted by noon, but enough to remind everyone that winter wasn't asking permission. It was coming whether they were ready or not. Eliza stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the flakes drift down through the gray morning light. Her breath fogged in the cold air. Behind her, the stove crackled and popped, fighting to keep the room warm. Door's open, Martha said without looking up from the eggs she was frying. Eliza closed it. Sorry. Cold gets in, heat gets out, basic physics. I know. Then act like it. Eliza bit back a response and went to the sink. Her hands were chapped from the constant washing, red and raw around the knuckles. She'd tried using the salve Caleb had given her weeks ago, but it only helped so much. Work wore it away faster than she could reapply it. She filled the coffee pot, set it on the stove, and started slicing bread for toast. The hands would be in soon. They always were, like clockwork, stumbling and half asleep and hungry, smelling of horses and hay, and the particular funk of men who worked outdoors for 12 hours a day. Eliza had gotten used to it. Gotten used to a lot of things, actually. The way Danny always tried to catch her eye when he came in, like he thought she'd suddenly notice him if he just smiled wide enough. The way the foreman, a grizzled man named Tom, checked every pot and pan like he was inspecting for sabotage. The way Martha hummed off key when she cooked, some tuneless melody that drove Eliza quietly insane. And the way Caleb never said good morning, just nodded. Every single day, same nod, same silence. It should have bothered her. Somehow, it didn't. The door opened and the first wave of hands filed in, stomping snow off their boots and shaking it from their hats. Tom was first, as always, followed by Danny and 3 others whose names Eliza had learned but never used. Morning, Danny said brightly. Morning, Eliza replied. Cold out there. I noticed. Supposed to get colder. Usually does. Danny grinned like she'd said something clever. Tom shot him a look that said, shut up and sit down, which he did. Eliza poured coffee, set out plates, and stayed out of the way while Martha brought over the eggs and bacon. The men ate like they always did, fast and focused, barely talking. Food was fuel, nothing more. Caleb came in last. He took his usual spot at the end of the table, accepted the coffee Eliza poured him, and ate in silence. She'd stopped trying to read his moods weeks ago. The man had exactly 2 settings, quiet and quieter. But today, something was different. He kept glancing toward the window. Not obviously. Just quick looks, like he was checking something. After breakfast, when the hands had cleared out and Eliza was scraping plates, he appeared beside her. You know anything about horses? Eliza looked up. Some. Why? Got a mare that's been off her feed for 2 days, won't let anyone near her. You try Tom? Tom says she's being difficult. Is she? Caleb's mouth twitched. Probably, but I want another opinion. And you're asking me? You handled the colt. That was different. How? Eliza set down the plate. The colt was hurt, scared. This sounds behavioral. So? So I'm not a horse trainer. Didn't ask you to train her. Asked if you'd take a look. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron. When? Now. Martha made a noise from across the kitchen that might have been disapproval or indigestion. Hard to tell. Caleb ignored her. Eliza followed him out. The snow had stopped, leaving the world clean and white and eerily quiet. Their boots crunched on the frozen ground as they crossed the yard toward the stables. What's her name? Eliza asked. Juniper. Pretty name. She's a pretty horse, also stubborn as hell. Sounds familiar. Caleb glanced at her. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. They reached the stable. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the smell of hay and manure and animal warmth. Horses shifted in their stalls, watching the newcomers with calm, dark eyes. Except one. At the far end, a chestnut mare stood with her head low, ears pinned back. She didn't look sick exactly, just miserable. That's her, Caleb said. Eliza approached slowly. Hey, girl. The mare's ears flicked forward, then back. I'm not going to hurt you. Another flick. Eliza stopped a few feet from the stall door. Can I go in? If you want to get kicked. Has she kicked anyone? Not yet, but Tom thinks she's about to. Eliza studied the mare. Her coat was dull, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were alert, watching. She's not sick, Eliza said. How do you know? Because she's tracking me. Sick horses don't bother. Then what's wrong with her? Eliza tilted her head, looking closer. The mare shifted her weight, favoring her left hind leg, just barely. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. She's hurt, Eliza said. Caleb frowned. Where? Back left leg. She's keeping weight off it. Tom checked her legs. Did he check her hooves? Caleb's expression shifted. He crossed to the stall, opened the door carefully, and moved to the mare's hindquarters. She tensed but didn't bolt. He lifted the hoof, found the stone wedged deep in the frog. Son of a bitch, he muttered. He pulled a hoof pick from his pocket and worked the stone loose. It took a minute, but when it finally came free, the mare let out a long breath and shifted her weight evenly. Caleb straightened, holding the stone between his fingers. 3 days she's been like this. Easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Tom should have been looking for it. Tom's got a lot on his plate. Caleb pocketed the stone, ran a hand along the mare's flank. Thanks. For what? Noticing. Eliza shrugged. I just looked. They walked back toward the house in silence. The sun was higher now, burning off the last of the snow. By afternoon, the ground would be muddy and half frozen, which meant everyone would track it into the kitchen and Martha would complain. Some things were predictable. You grew up around horses? Caleb asked. Some. Where? Eliza hesitated. East. That's not specific. Wasn't trying to be. Caleb didn't push. They reached the kitchen and he stopped, turning to face her. You don't talk about yourself much. Neither do you. Fair point. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but whatever it was got swallowed before it reached the air. Instead, he just nodded and walked away. Eliza watched him go, then went back inside. Martha was rolling dough for biscuits, her hands working with the kind of unconscious precision that came from doing the same task 1,000 times. He likes you, she said without looking up. Eliza froze. What? The boss. He likes you. He barely talks to me. That's how I know. Eliza grabbed a rag and started wiping down the counter. You're imagining things. I've worked here 12 years. I know what I'm seeing. Then you're seeing wrong, Martha snorted. Suit yourself. They worked in silence for a while. Then Martha said, You planning to tell him? Tell him what? About the baby's father. Eliza's hand stilled. That's none of his business. Maybe not, but people talk. Let them. They're saying you ran away, that the father did something bad. They don't know what they're talking about. So tell them. Eliza turned to face her. Why? So they can judge me for a different reason? I'm not interested in defending myself to people who've already made up their minds. Martha studied her for a long moment. Then she went back to her dough. You're tougher than you look, she said quietly. I'd have to be. The rest of the day passed without incident. Eliza cooked, cleaned, and stayed out of everyone's way. By evening, her back was screaming and her feet felt like lead weights, but she pushed through. She always did. After dinner, she retreated to her room and collapsed onto the cot. The baby was restless tonight, rolling and kicking like it was running out of space. Which it was. She was 7 months along now, maybe closer to 8. Hard to tell without a doctor, and the nearest one was in town, which might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did her. She'd make it work. She had to. A knock on the door startled her. Yeah? The door opened. Caleb stood in the doorway, holding something wrapped in cloth. Brought you this, he said. He stepped inside, set the bundle on the crate that served as her table, and unwrapped it. A book, old, leather-bound, with gilded edges that had faded to dull gold. What is it? Eliza asked. Stories. Figured you might want something to read. She sat up slowly, running her fingers over the cover. Where'd you get it? It was my wife's. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eliza looked up at him. You don't have to. She liked to read, Caleb continued, his voice flat, factual. Had a whole shelf of books. Most of them are still up at the house. This one, I don't know. Thought you might like it. Thank you. He nodded, turned to leave. Caleb? He stopped. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Giving me a job, a room, your wife's book. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, careful. Because you remind me that not everything's broken. Then he left. Eliza sat there holding the book, feeling the weight of it in her hands. Not everything's broken. She opened it to the first page and started to read. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of work and cold and the slow, relentless march toward winter. The snow kept coming, not heavy, but consistent, enough to turn the ground hard and make every task take twice as long. Eliza's belly grew. Cis's, it was impossible to hide now. Even under the loose dresses she wore, the shape was obvious. The hands noticed but didn't comment. Martha noticed and occasionally asked if she was feeling all right. Caleb noticed and said nothing at all. But he started doing small things, carrying heavy pots when she reached for them, making sure the stove in her room stayed stocked with wood, leaving extra food on her plate when he thought she wasn't looking. Eliza didn't acknowledge it, didn't thank him, because acknowledging it meant admitting that she needed help, and she wasn't ready to do that yet. One afternoon in early December, she was peeling potatoes when Tom came into the kitchen looking like he'd swallowed something bitter. "Boss wants to see you," he said. Eliza set down the knife. "Why?" "Didn't say." She wiped her hands and followed him outside. Caleb was standing by the corral, watching two of the hands work with a young gelding that kept shying away from the saddle. "You wanted to see me?" Eliza said. Caleb turned. "Town's having a Christmas market this weekend." "Okay." "Martha's going. Thought you might want to go with her." Eliza frowned. "Why?" "Because you've been here 2 months and you haven't left the property once." "I'm fine." "Didn't say you weren't, but you might want to get supplies. Things for the baby." Eliza's chest tightened. "I don't have money for that." "You've been working. You've got wages." "You haven't paid me." Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Was going to give this to you end of the month, but if you need it now, take it." Eliza stared at the envelope. "How much?" "What we agreed on, plus a little extra." "I didn't agree to anything." "You worked. I'm paying you. That's the agreement." She took the envelope slowly, feeling the weight of the bills inside. It wasn't much. Probably wouldn't buy half of what she'd need, but it was more than she'd had in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "Martha leaves Saturday morning. Be ready by 7. He walked away before she could respond. Saturday came cold and clear. Eliza woke before dawn, dressed in her warmest clothes, which wasn't saying much, and met Martha by the wagon. The older woman looked her up and down. "That all you got?" "Yeah." Martha sighed and disappeared into the bunkhouse. She came back a minute later with a heavy wool coat. "Put this on." "I can't. It's mine. Doesn't fit anymore, and you'll freeze without it." Eliza pulled on the coat. It was too big in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves, but it was warm. "Thank you." "Don't mention it. Literally. If anyone asks, you found it." They climbed onto the wagon and Martha snapped the reins. The horse started forward, pulling them down the long drive toward the main road. The ride into town took an hour. They didn't talk much. Martha wasn't the chatty type, and Eliza was too busy watching the landscape roll by. The way the morning light caught the frost on the fence posts, the way the mountains rose in the distance like broken teeth. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, like everything else out here. Blackidge looked different than Eliza remembered. The market had transformed the main street into something almost festive. Stalls selling food and crafts, children running between them, the smell of roasting chestnuts and pine. People were smiling, laughing. It felt like a different world. Martha tied up the wagon and handed Eliza a basket. 2 hours. Meet back here." "Where are you going?" "To see a man about a thing. Don't ask questions." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with surprising speed for a woman her size. Eliza stood there for a moment, clutching the basket and feeling suddenly exposed. The last time she'd been here, every door had closed in her face. Every person had looked at her like she was something dirty. She wondered if anything had changed. Probably not. She started walking. The first stall sold fabric and thread. Eliza paused, running her fingers over a bolt of soft cotton. She could make clothes for the baby. Something simple. A few gowns, maybe a blanket. "Can I help you?" The woman behind the stall was middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. "Just looking," Eliza said. "That's fine, take your time." Eliza selected 2 yards of the cotton and a spool of thread. The woman wrapped them carefully, named a price that was more than fair. "You're not from town, are you?" the woman asked as Eliza counted out coins. "No." "Passing through?" "Working at the Rourke Ranch." The woman's expression shifted. Not unfriendly exactly, just careful. "That's so?" "Yes." "How's Caleb doing?" "Fine, I guess." "Good, good." She handed over the wrapped package. "You take care now." Eliza moved on to the next stall, and the next. She bought a small pot for heating water, a bar of soap, a tin of salve for her hands. Simple things. Necessary things. And then she saw it. A stall at the end of the row, selling wooden toys. A woman was arranging them on a table, carved horses and dolls and a small cradle, no bigger than a shoebox, with intricate details carved into the sides. Eliza stopped. The cradle was beautiful. The kind of thing you'd pass down, the kind of thing that mattered. "You like it?" The woman behind the stall was younger than Eliza, maybe 20, with a baby on her hip and flour on her apron. "It's beautiful," Eliza said. "My husband makes them. This one's oak. Took him 2 weeks." Eliza touched the edge of the cradle, feeling the smooth wood under her fingers. "How much?" The woman named a price that made Eliza's stomach drop. She had the money. Barely. But if she bought the cradle, she wouldn't have enough left for anything else. "I'll think about it," she said. The woman smiled. "It'll be here if you change your mind." Eliza walked away, but she kept looking back. She spent the next hour wandering the market, trying to convince herself she didn't need the cradle. The baby could sleep in a drawer. Or a basket. Babies didn't care. But she cared. And that was the problem. When the 2 hours were almost up, she went back to the stall. The cradle was still there. "Changed your mind?" the woman asked. "Yeah." Eliza counted out the money, watching her carefully saved wages disappear into the woman's hand. It hurt, but not as much as she'd expected. The woman wrapped the cradle in cloth and tied it with string. "Congratulations," she said. "For what?" She nodded at Eliza's belly. "The baby." Eliza had gotten so used to people not mentioning it that the acknowledgement caught her off guard. "Thanks," she managed. She carried the cradle back to the wagon, where Martha was already waiting with a crate of supplies. The older woman looked at the wrapped bundle. "What'd you get?" "Something for the baby." Martha didn't ask to see it, just nodded and helped her load it onto the wagon. They rode back in silence. When they reached the ranch, Caleb was waiting by the barn. He helped unload the supplies. his eyes catching on the wrapped cradle. "What's that?" he asked. "Nothing," Eliza said quickly. But Martha, because she apparently couldn't help herself, said, "Baby cradle, oak, real nice work." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Where are you planning to put it?" "My room. Not much space in there." "I'll make it work." He looked like he wanted to say something, but whatever it was stayed locked behind his teeth. Instead, he just picked up the cradle and carried it to her room. Eliza followed, watching as he set it down carefully in the corner by the window. "It's nice," he said. "Thanks." He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking at the cradle like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then he left. Eliza unwrapped it slowly, running her hands over the smooth wood. It smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, like something made with care. She'd spent almost everything she had on it, and she didn't regret it for a second. That night, she lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling, one hand on her belly. The baby was quiet now, resting. She thought about the woman at the market who'd congratulated her. The first person in months who'd treated the pregnancy like something worth celebrating instead of something shameful. It had felt strange, good strange, the kind of strange she could get used to. Over the next few days, something shifted on the ranch. Small things, barely noticeable. Danny started saying good morning to her belly, which was weird but somehow endearing. Tom stopped inspecting her cooking quite so closely. And Martha started teaching her things. How to make the biscuits rise higher, how to keep the gravy from getting lumpy, little tricks that made the work easier. "You're not half bad at this," Martha said one morning. "High praise. Don't let it go to your head." But there was warmth in her voice now, something that hadn't been there before. Even Caleb seemed different. He started eating breakfast a little slower, sometimes asking questions about the food, where she'd learned to cook, what she'd made back. He never finished that sentence, never asked where back was, and Eliza never offered. One evening, about a week before Christmas, she was cleaning up after dinner when she heard shouting from outside. She dried her hands and went to the door. Two of the hands were in the yard, squaring up like they were about to throw punches. Tom was between them, trying to talk them down. "What's going on?" Eliza asked. "Stay inside," Tom said. She ignored him. "What happened?" One of the men, a hothead named Frank, turned on her. "This doesn't concern you. You're shouting on the property where I work. I'd say it concerns me." "Frank's calling me a thief," the other man said. His name was Luis, and he was one of the quieter hands, the kind who kept to himself. "Because you are," Frank shot back. "I didn't touch your stuff." "Someone did, and you're the only one with a reason." "What reason?" "You know damn well what reason." Luis took a step forward. Tom put a hand on his chest. "Both of you, calm down." "I'm not calming down until—" "Enough." Caleb's voice cut through the argument like a blade. He was standing on the porch of the main house, arms crossed, expression dark. Everyone froze. "What's this about?" he asked. "Frank's missing a watch," Tom said. "Says Luis took it." "Did you?" Caleb asked Luis. "No, sir." "You sure?" "Positive." Caleb looked at Frank. "Where'd you last see it?" "In my bunk, this morning." "And now it's gone?" "Yeah." "Anyone else been in the bunkhouse today?" Frank hesitated. "Don't know." "Then how do you know Luis took it?" "Because—" Frank stopped, swallowed. "I just know." "That's not good enough." "He's Mexican," Frank said. "They steal." The silence that followed was arctic. Luis's jaw tightened. Tom looked like he wanted to disappear, and Caleb walked down the porch steps slowly, crossing the yard until he was standing directly in front of Frank. "Say that again," he said quietly. Frank's courage evaporated. "I didn't mean—" "Say it again." "Boss, Get your things and get out." Frank's eyes went wide. "What?" "You're done. Off the property by morning." "You can't fire me over this." "I just did. I've been here 3 years." "And now you're leaving." Caleb turned to Luis. "Check the bunkhouse. If the watch turns up, bring it to me. If it doesn't, we'll figure out what happened." Luis nodded. Caleb looked at Tom. "Make sure Frank's gone by sunrise." Then he walked back into the house. Frank stood there, face red, fists clenched. For a second, Eliza thought he might do something stupid, but he didn't. He just turned and stormed off toward the bunkhouse. Tom let out a long breath. Well, that was something. Is Caleb always like that? Eliza asked. Only when someone deserves it. The watch turned up 2 days later, not in the bunkhouse, in the barn, half buried in a pile of hay where Frank must have dropped it while working. Luis brought it to Caleb personally. Found it this morning, he said. Caleb turned the watch over in his hands. Where? East corner of the barn. Must have fallen out of Frank's pocket. You tell him? He's already gone. Caleb nodded. Keep it. Luis blinked. Sir? You found it. It's yours. I can't. Yeah, you can. Caleb handed it back. Consider it a bonus for not punching Frank in the face when you had the chance. Luis smiled, just barely, and pocketed the watch. Thank you. After he left, Eliza said, That was a good thing you did. Caleb shrugged. Frank was an ass. Still, you stood up for Louis. Shouldn't have to stand up for someone to be treated like a person. He said it like it was obvious, like it wasn't something most people in this town would even consider. And in that moment, Eliza understood something she'd been circling around for weeks. Caleb Rourke wasn't just a hard man running a ranch. He was someone who knew what it felt like to be judged for things outside his control, and he refused to do the same to others. Christmas came quietly. There were no decorations, no songs, no celebration, just another day of work. But Martha made a special dinner, roast chicken and potatoes and pie, and the hands ate together in the kitchen, passing dishes and making jokes. It felt almost like a family. Almost. Caleb gave each of the hands a small bonus. Martha got a new set of knives, and Eliza got a blanket. Soft wool, dyed deep blue, with white stitching along the edges. For the baby, Caleb said when he handed it to her. She stared at it, throat tight. Thank you. It's nothing. It's not nothing. He looked uncomfortable. Just seemed like you could use it. That night, Eliza folded the blanket carefully and placed it in the cradle. The blue looked perfect against the oak. She sat on her cot, one hand on her belly, and let herself imagine just for a moment what it would be like when the baby came. Scary, painful, uncertain, but maybe not impossible. January hit like a fist. The cold turned vicious, the kind that crept through walls and settled in your bones no matter how close you sat to the fire. Eliza's room, small as it was, became her refuge. She'd wake in the dark, feed wood into the stove, and wait for the heat to chase away enough of the chill that she could move without her joints screaming. 8 months now. Maybe more. Her belly had grown so large that simple tasks, bending to tie her boots, reaching across the counter, required planning. Martha had started doing the heavy lifting without being asked, shoving Eliza toward the lighter work with gruff comments about not being stupid. You lift that pot, you'll drop it and the baby, she'd said yesterday. I'm fine. You're 8 months pregnant and stubborn. Those things don't mix. Eliza had stepped back. Let Martha win. Because the truth was, she was tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Her back ached constantly, her feet swelled by midday. And the baby, restless, cramped, running out of room, kicked hard enough sometimes to take her breath away. But she kept working, because stopping meant thinking about what came next, and she wasn't ready for that yet. One morning in mid-January, she was mixing biscuit dough when the door banged open and Danny stumbled in, face pale. Fire, he gasped. Martha's head snapped up. Where? South pasture, spreading fast. How'd it start? Don't know. Lightning maybe, wind's pushing it north. Eliza's hand stilled in the dough. North toward here? Not yet, but if it jumps the creek... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Martha was already moving, pulling on her coat. Get the hands. Start moving the livestock to the east fields. Already on it. Boss wants everyone ready to evacuate if it gets close. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron. What can I do? Stay inside, Martha said. I can help. You can stay inside and not be one more thing we have to worry about. It stung, but it was fair. Danny disappeared back into the chaos outside. Through the window, Eliza could see men running, shouting, leading horses toward the eastern pastures. The sky to the south had taken on an orange haze that shouldn't have been there, Martha grabbed a bucket. I'm going to help wet down the outbuildings. You stay put. Martha, I mean it, Eliza. Don't make me regret giving a damn about you. Then she was gone. Eliza stood in the empty kitchen, listening to the shouting outside, and felt utterly useless. The fire burned for 3 days. Not close enough to threaten the main ranch, but close enough that everyone stayed on edge. The hands took shifts watching the perimeter, ready to move if the wind shifted. Smoke hung over everything, turning the sun into a dull red disk and making the air taste like ash. Eliza helped where she could, keeping food ready, boiling water, making sure no one collapsed from exhaustion. But mostly she stayed out of the way, watching from the kitchen window as Caleb coordinated the effort with the kind of grim efficiency that came from experience. He barely slept. She knew because she barely slept either, and every time she looked out, he was there, checking fences, talking to Tom, riding out to inspect the fire breaks they'd cut. On the third night, the wind finally shifted east, pushing the flames away from the valley and toward the empty scrubland beyond. By morning, the danger had passed, but the damage was done. 200 acres burned, 3 outbuildings lost. Half the southern pasture turned to ash. It could have been worse. It could have been everything. The hands gathered in the kitchen for breakfast that morning, exhausted and filthy. Nobody talked much. They just ate, refueled, and tried not to think about how close they'd come. Caleb came in last, moving like every step hurt. His face was streaked with soot, his hands wrapped in bandages where embers had burned through his gloves. Eliza poured him coffee without being asked. He took it, drank half in one pull, and set the cup down. Thanks, he said. His voice was raw, wrecked from 3 days of shouting orders through smoke. You should rest, Eliza said. Later. Caleb. Later. He finished the coffee and walked back out. Stubborn bastard. That afternoon, Eliza was washing dishes when she felt it. A tightening, low in her belly, sharp enough to make her stop. She waited. It passed. She went back to the dishes. 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time, she had to grip the counter. Martha looked over. You all right? Yeah, just another tightening, stronger. Yeah. Martha's eyes narrowed. How far apart? I don't know, 5 minutes? How long's it been happening? Just started? Martha dried her hands slowly. Could be nothing. Could be false labor. Could be? But if it's not, I know. They looked at each other. I'll keep working, Eliza said. If it gets worse, I'll tell you. Martha didn't look convinced, but she nodded. The contractions continued through the afternoon. Irregular. Sometimes 10 minutes apart, sometimes 20. Uncomfortable, but manageable. Eliza kept moving, kept working, because stopping meant admitting this was happening and she wasn't ready. Not yet. By evening, they'd slowed down. By nightfall, they'd stopped completely. False labor. Just like Martha said. Eliza lay on her cot that night, one hand on her belly, and tried to slow her racing heart. Not yet. Please. Not yet. The next morning, she woke to voices outside her window. Raised voices. Angry. She pulled on her dress and stepped outside. A group of townspeople had gathered in the yard, maybe a dozen of them, led by a man Eliza recognized from the general store. His name was Miller. Owned half the businesses in Blackidge and thought that meant he owned the people too. Caleb stood between them and the house, arms crossed. I told you, he was saying. The answer's no. We're not asking, Miller said. We're telling. The town council voted. You're required to contribute. Required by who? By the community you're part of. I'm not part of your community. I'm part of this ranch. The ranch is part of the valley. The valley's part of the town. That's not how property works. Miller's face reddened. You think you can just sit up here and ignore the rest of us? We all pitch in when there's trouble. That's how it works. I pitched in plenty during the fire. You protected your own land. And you want me to pay for the privilege? We want you to pay your share. Caleb's expression didn't change. How much? Miller named a number that made Eliza's stomach drop. It was more than most people made in 6 months. That's ridiculous, Caleb said. That's what the council decided. Then the council can go to hell. One of the other men stepped forward, younger, eager to prove something. You don't get to decide. I do, actually. This is my property. You're trespassing. We have a right. You have nothing. Caleb's voice went cold, flat. Get off my land. Or what? Caleb didn't answer. He just stared. The young man's courage faltered. He looked to Miller, who was turning an impressive shade of purple. This isn't over, Miller said. Yes, it is. Tom? The foreman appeared from the barn, rifle in hand, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it. Show these gentlemen to the road, Caleb said. Tom nodded. Happy to. The group backed toward their wagons, muttering threats and promises that meant nothing. Miller shot Caleb one last look, pure venom, then climbed onto his wagon and snapped the reins. They left. The hands dispersed, going back to their work. Tom returned the rifle to the barn. And Caleb saw Eliza standing by the kitchen door. Their eyes met. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago. Then he turned and walked toward the main house. Eliza found him an hour later, sitting on the porch with a bottle of whiskey that was already half empty. Drinking before noon, she said. Must be serious. Go away, Eliza. No. He took a drink. I'm not in the mood for company. Too bad. She lowered herself carefully onto the porch step, her belly making the movement awkward. What'd they want the money for? Rebuilding the church. Fire took the steeple. And you said no. I did. Why? Caleb laughed, sharp and humorless. Because they didn't ask, they demanded, like I owe them something. Won't you? You live here. I live here and mind my own business. That's the deal. There is no deal. There should be. He took another drink. You know what Miller said to me when my wife died? When Emma and Sarah... He stopped, swallowed. He said it was a shame, said they'd pray for me. Then he showed up a week later asking if I'd donate to the new schoolhouse. Eliza was quiet. A week, Caleb repeated. They weren't even in the ground yet. People are thoughtless. People are vultures. They don't care about you. They care about what you can give them. Not everyone. Enough of them. Eliza reached over and took the bottle from his hand. She took a small sip, just enough to feel the burn, and handed it back. What happened to them? She asked quietly. Caleb stared at the horizon. Fever. Came through fast. Emma got sick first. Sarah a day later. The doctor said there was nothing he could do. Just keep them comfortable. How long? 4 days. Emma died first. Sarah held on another day, like she was waiting to make sure her mother wasn't alone. His voice cracked. Eliza didn't say anything, just sat with him in the silence. I should have taken them to a city, Caleb said. Better doctors, better hospitals, but I thought... He shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought, I was wrong. You did what you could. It wasn't enough. It never is. He looked at her. What's that supposed to mean? Eliza put a hand on her belly. I left someone too. Someone I thought I loved. Turned out he loved other things more than he loved me. Like what? His reputation, his family's approval, the idea of me more than the reality. You know about the baby? Yeah. And he told me to take care of it. Gave me money and an address in another state where I could go and no one would know. Caleb's jaw tightened. What'd you do? Kept the money, didn't go to the address, got on a train and ended up here. Why here? Because it was far enough away that I'd never have to see him again. They sat in silence for a while. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. You regret it? Caleb asked. Which part? Keeping the baby. Eliza thought about it, really thought about it. No, she said. I regret him, but not this. Caleb nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you ended up here. Yeah? Yeah. He didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. Eliza stood using the railing to pull herself up. Get some sleep. You look like hell. Thanks. I mean it. The ranch needs you functional. The ranch survived before me. It'll survive after. Maybe. But right now it's got you. So take care of yourself. She went back to the kitchen, leaving him alone with his whiskey and his ghosts. That night, the contractions started again. Stronger this time, closer together. Eliza tried to ignore them, tried to breathe through them. But by midnight, she was pacing her small room, gripping the back of the chair every time one hit. This wasn't false labor. This was real. She needed help. She opened her door and stepped into the cold night air. The kitchen was dark. The bunkhouse, too. Everyone was asleep. Everyone except... Light flickered in the window of the main house. Caleb, still awake. Eliza crossed the yard, each step deliberate. Another contraction hit halfway there, and she had to stop, bracing herself against a fence post. Breathe, just breathe. It passed. She made it to the porch, climbed the steps, and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Caleb stood there in his undershirt, hair disheveled, eyes sharp despite the late hour. "Eliza, what?" "It's time," she said. He stared at her. "Time for what?" "The baby. It's coming." For a second, he just looked at her. Then his brain caught up. "Now?" "Soon." "How soon?" "I don't know. Hours, maybe." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. Okay, we should get you to town. The doctor. There's no time. There has to be..." Another contraction hit. Eliza gasped, doubling over. Caleb caught her, holding her steady. "All right," he said. "All right, come on." He helped her inside, got her to the sofa in the sitting room. She collapsed onto it, breathing hard. "I'll get Martha," Caleb said. "No time." "Eliza, there's no time." He looked at her, then at the door, then back at her, making a choice. "What do you need?" he asked. "Water, clean sheets, something to cut the cord." I'm not..." "Caleb?" She grabbed his hand, squeezed. "I need you to not panic." "I'm not panicking." "You're panicking." He took a breath. "I'm going to get the supplies." He disappeared upstairs, came back a minute later with sheets, towels, and a knife that he'd clearly just sterilized over a candle flame. "Anything else?" he asked. "Just stay." "I'm not going anywhere." Another contraction, worse than the others. Eliza cried out, curling in on herself. Caleb knelt beside her. "What can I do?" "Nothing. Just..." She gasped. "Just talk to me. Keep me here." "Here where?" "Present. Not scared." "Okay." He thought for a second. "You ever been to the ocean?" "What?" "The ocean. Have you seen it?" "Yeah, once. Why?" "Tell me about it." "Now?" "Yeah, now." Eliza stared at him like he'd lost his mind. But then another contraction hit and she understood. Distraction. "It was cold," she said through gritted teeth. "The water, colder than I expected." "Where was this?" "Maine. I was 10. "What were you doing in Maine?" "My father," she gasped. "My father had business there, took me along." "Did you like it?" "Hated it. Too cold, too loud." "Loud?" "The waves. They never stopped." The contraction eased. Eliza sagged against the sofa. "Keep going," Caleb said. "There's nothing else." "There's always something else." So she told him about the lighthouse, about the seafood restaurant where everything tasted like salt, about the seagulls that stole her sandwich right out of her hands. And every time a contraction hit, he kept her talking, kept her present, kept her from drowning in the pain. Hours passed. The contractions got closer, longer, harder. Eliza had never felt anything like it. Her body was doing something outside her control, something primal and terrifying and unstoppable. She screamed, couldn't help it. Caleb held her hand, let her squeeze until his fingers went white. "You're doing great," he said. "I'm not." "You are." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Probably not. But I'm saying it anyway." Despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the sheer impossibility of what was happening, Eliza almost laughed. Then the pressure changed, shifted, became something urgent. "I need to push," she gasped. Caleb's eyes went wide. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Okay. He moved to the end of the sofa. I need to check. Just do it." He did. "I can see the head," he said, voice strangled. "Is that good?" "I think so." You think? Eliza, I'm not a doctor. Then improvise. The next contraction hit, and she pushed. Hard. Harder than she'd ever pushed anything in her life. That's it, Caleb said. That's it. Keep going. She pushed again, and again. And a sound, a cry, sharp and indignant and very, very alive. Eliza collapsed back, gasping for air. It's a girl, Caleb said, his voice breaking. He wrapped the baby in one of the towels, his hands shaking, cut the cord with the knife, wiped her face clean. Then he placed her on Eliza's chest. Eliza looked down at the tiny, screaming creature in her arms and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not break. Open. Hi, she whispered. Hi, baby. The crying stopped. The baby blinked up at her with unfocused eyes, making small snuffling sounds. Perfect. Not because she was flawless, she was covered in vernix and blood and looked like an angry little alien, but because she was here, alive, real. Eliza looked up at Caleb, who was standing there with tears streaming down his face. You okay? She asked. He laughed, wet and choked. Am I okay? Are you okay? I think so. You... He shook his head. You're incredible. I'm exhausted. That too. They sat there for a long moment, just breathing, just being. Then Caleb said, We should get you cleaned up, get you both to a bed. Yeah, but neither of them moved. Because this moment, this impossible, terrifying, beautiful moment, was theirs, and neither of them wanted it to end. Eventually, they did move. Caleb helped Eliza upstairs to one of the bedrooms, a room that clearly hadn't been used in years, with dust on the furniture and curtains that smelled like age. But the bed was large and the sheets were clean after he changed them, and when Eliza finally lay down with the baby tucked against her side, she felt something close to safe. Caleb stood in the doorway, uncertain. I should get Martha, he said. It's 3 a.m. She'll want to know. She'll find out in a few hours. Let her sleep. He nodded, but didn't leave. What? Eliza asked. Nothing, just... He looked at the baby. What are you going to name her? Eliza hadn't thought about it, hadn't let herself think about it, because thinking about names meant accepting that this was real, that she was a mother now, that everything had changed. She looked down at the tiny face pressed against her chest. Sky, she said quietly. Sky, with an E at the end. Caleb smiled, just a little. Why Sky? Because she's free. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says about her or me, she gets to decide who she is. That's a lot to put on a name. Maybe, but it's hers. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, It's a good name. Thanks. Get some rest. I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Caleb? He stopped. Thank you for not panicking. I absolutely panicked. Well, you hit it well. He left, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. Eliza lay in the dark, listening to Sky's breathing. The baby made small sounds, little sighs and grunts that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Every few minutes, Eliza would put her hand on Sky's chest, just to feel it rise and fall, to confirm she was still breathing. She didn't sleep, couldn't, too afraid that if she closed her eyes, something would go wrong. Dawn came slow and gray. Through the window, Eliza could see the sky lightening by degrees, turning from black to charcoal to something almost blue. She heard movement downstairs. Voices. The clatter of pots in the kitchen. Martha's voice rose above the others, sharp with confusion. Where the hell is she? Then Caleb's voice, lower, explaining. A moment of silence, then footsteps on the stairs. The door opened and Martha appeared, still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over it, hair wild around her face. She looked at Eliza, at the baby. Well, she said, that's one way to avoid morning shift. Eliza laughed, exhausted and slightly hysterical, and then immediately regretted it because everything hurt. Martha crossed to the bed, peered down at Sky with the critical eye of someone who'd seen plenty of babies and wasn't easily impressed. She's small, Martha said. She's a baby. I mean, smaller than most. You eating enough? I ate fine. Clearly not, but there was no heat in it. Martha reached out and touched Sky's hand with one finger. The baby's fist closed around it reflexively. Strong grip, Martha observed. Is that good? Better than weak. She pulled her hand back and looked at Eliza properly. How are you feeling? Like I got trampled by a horse. That's normal. You lose a lot of blood? Some, not sure how much. Martha lifted the edge of the blanket, checked the sheets underneath. Her expression stayed neutral, which Eliza chose to take as a good sign. You'll be sore for a while. Probably a week before you're moving normal. 2 before you feel human. Great. I'll bring up some food. You need to keep your strength up if you're planning to feed her yourself. I am. Then you'll eat even when you don't want to. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Martha's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Welcome to motherhood, she said. It only gets harder from here. Then she left. Eliza looked down at Sky, who was starting to fuss. Hungry, probably. Or uncomfortable. Or both. All right, Eliza whispered. Let's figure this out together. The first week was brutal. Eliza had thought pregnancy was hard, thought labor was hard, but nothing prepared her for the relentless exhaustion of caring for a newborn. Sky cried. A lot. Sometimes because she was hungry, sometimes because she needed changing, sometimes for reasons Eliza couldn't figure out, no matter what she tried. And the feeding, nobody told her it would hurt like that. Martha showed her how to position Sky, how to make sure she was latching properly, but even done right, it felt like someone was trying to saw her in half with a rusty blade. She gritted her teeth and did it anyway. Because what else was she going to do? Caleb hovered. Not obviously, not intrusively, but he was there, bringing meals when Eliza forgot to eat, taking Sky for an hour in the evening so Eliza could sleep, sitting in the chair by the window while Eliza fed the baby, not talking, just present. You don't have to do this, Eliza said one night. Do what? Any of it. I can manage. I know you can, but you don't have to. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she didn't need help, that she'd gotten this far on her own and could keep going. But the truth was, she was drowning, and Caleb was the only thing keeping her head above water. Thank you, she said quietly. He just nodded. By the second week, Eliza was allowed downstairs. Martha had deemed her healed enough to move around, though she forbade any actual work. You're on baby duty. That's it. I can help with… No. Martha, do you want to bleed out on my kitchen floor? Because that's what'll happen if you push too hard too fast. Eliza stayed on baby duty. She'd set up the cradle in the corner of the kitchen where she could keep an eye on Sky while Martha worked. Most of the time, the baby slept. But when she was awake, the hands found excuses to wander through. Danny was the worst. Can I hold her, Shva? He asked for the third time that day. You held her this morning. Yeah, but she's awake now. So? So she'll remember me better if I hold her while she's awake. She's 2 weeks old. She doesn't remember anything. You don't know that. Eliza sighed and handed over the baby. Danny cradled Sky like she was made of glass, grinning like an idiot. Hey there, little lady. Remember me? I'm Danny. I'm going to teach you to ride when you're bigger. She's not riding anything until she's at least 5, Eliza said. 5's perfect. I was riding at 4. And how many times did you fall off? That's not the point. Tom appeared in the doorway, saw Danny with the baby, and shook his head. You're going to drop her, he said. I'm not going to drop her. You dropped a hammer on your foot yesterday. That was different. How? Hammers don't have faces. Tom looked at Eliza. You're braver than me, letting him hold her. I'm supervising. Still. He disappeared back outside. Danny rocked Sky gently, humming something off-key. The baby stared up at him with unfocused eyes, occasionally making small sounds that could have been contentment or gas. She likes me, Danny said. She tolerates you. Same thing. Martha came in from the pantry, saw the scene, and snorted. You planning to work today, Danny? Or just stand there making faces at a baby? Can I do both? No, but out. Danny handed Sky back reluctantly and slouched toward the door. You're mean, Martha, he called over his shoulder. And you're lazy. Now move. Despite herself, Eliza smiled. It was strange, this life she'd fallen into. Strange, but not bad. The ranch had a rhythm to it, a pattern she was starting to understand. Work and rest and meals and the slow turn of seasons, simple things, grounding things, things she hadn't realized she needed. One afternoon in early February, she was sitting on the porch with Sky when a wagon rolled up the drive. Not a ranch wagon, someone from town. Eliza tensed. Visitors were rarely good news. The wagon stopped and a woman climbed down, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of posture that said she knew exactly who she was and expected you to know it too. Mrs. Miller, wife of the man who'd tried to shake down Caleb last month. This wasn't going to be pleasant. Mrs. Miller approached the porch with a basket on her arm, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Hart," she said, "Mrs. Miller. I heard you had a baby." "You heard right." Mrs. Miller's eyes flicked to Sky, then away. "I brought some things, clothes mostly, and some preserves." She set the basket on the porch. Eliza stared at it. "Why?" she asked. "Excuse me? Why bring me anything? Your husband tried to extort money from Caleb. You all made it clear I wasn't welcome in town." Mrs. Miller's jaw tightened. "That was before." "Before what?" "Before we knew you were staying. So now that I'm here permanently, you'll tolerate me? I'm trying to do something kind. Kindness would have been treating me like a person when I first arrived." Mrs. Miller looked like she'd been slapped. For a moment, Eliza thought she'd leave, just pick up the basket and go, but she didn't. Instead, she sat down on the porch step. "You're right," she said quietly. "We should have been better. I should have been better." Eliza wasn't expecting that. "My husband's an ass," Mrs. Miller continued, "always has been. But the rest of us, we just went along because it was easier than fighting him." "That's not an excuse." "No, it's not." She looked at Sky. "She's beautiful." "Thanks." "What's her name?" "Sky." "That's unusual." "I like unusual." Mrs. Miller smiled slightly. "I can tell." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "The basket's yours whether you want it or not. And if you need anything, really need anything, you let me know." "Why the change of heart?" Mrs. Miller looked at her for a long moment. "Because I had a baby once without help, and it nearly killed me. Nobody should have to do that alone." She climbed back onto the wagon and left. Eliza sat there holding Sky, looking at the basket. Later, she'd open it, find the tiny clothes and the jars of preserves, and a handwritten note that said simply, "You're stronger than you know." But for now, she just sat and watched the wagon disappear down the drive. Things were shifting, slowly, imperceptibly, but shifting. A week later, Caleb found her in the kitchen after breakfast. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what's up?" He looked uncomfortable. "I was thinking about the baby, about you." Eliza's stomach tightened. "What about us?" "You're sleeping in my house, eating my food, not working." "I can start working again." Martha said, "That's not what I'm saying." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm saying it's not right, the arrangement." "What do you want me to do? Move back to the room by the kitchen?" "No, I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want to make it official." "Make what official?" "You working here, living here. I want to pay you a proper wage, make sure you and Sky are taken care of." Eliza stared at him. "Why?" "Because you've earned it. I've been here 4 months and spent the last month doing nothing but feeding a baby. And before that, you worked harder than half my hands. You've earned it," he repeated. "Caleb, just say yes, Eliza. Let me do this." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she didn't need his charity. But the truth was, she did need it. Needed the security. Needed to know she and Sky had a place here that couldn't be taken away on a whim. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "Yeah, okay." He looked relieved. "Good. That's good. How much are we talking?" He named a number that was more than generous. "That's too much," Eliza said. "It's fair." "It's more than you pay Tom." "Tom doesn't have a baby to feed." "Still, Eliza, just take it." She took it. That night, she lay in bed with Sky sleeping beside her and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place to stay. March came in wet and cold. The creek swelled with snowmelt, turning the lower pastures into mud pits. The hands spent most of their time moving livestock to higher ground and reinforcing fences that threatened to wash away. Eliza was back in the kitchen full-time now, with Skye in the cradle nearby. Martha had taught her how to balance cooking with motherhood, how to keep one eye on the stove and the other on the baby, how to work through exhaustion, how to accept help when it was offered. The ranch was preparing for spring calving, which meant everyone was on edge. Tom had ordered extra supplies. Caleb had hired 2 temporary hands to help with the workload, and Martha had started stockpiling food like they were preparing for a siege. "It's going to be chaos," she told Eliza. "Always is." "How bad?" "Last year we lost 3 calves and nearly lost a mother. Year before that, Tom broke his arm pulling a breech birth." "Sounds delightful." "It's ranching. Delightful's not part of the deal." Eliza was folding laundry when Skye started fussing. Not crying, just making those small sounds that meant she was waking up and would be hungry soon. Eliza set down the shirt she was folding and picked up the baby. "Hey, little one, you hungry?" Skye's mouth opened, searching. "Yeah, you are." She settled into the chair by the window and started feeding. It still hurt, but less than before. Her body was adapting, learning, small mercies. The door opened and Caleb came in, stomping mud off his boots. "Tom needs the wagon for—" He stopped, seeing Eliza. "Sorry, I can come back." "It's fine. What does Tom need?" "Wagon, for hauling fence posts, but I can wait." "Caleb, I'm feeding a baby, not bathing. You can talk to me." He looked uncomfortable, but stayed. "Keys are in the barn?" "Should be. Second drawer of the workbench." "Thanks." He started to leave, then paused. "She's getting bigger," he observed. Eliza looked down at Skye. "Yeah, she is. You doing okay with all of it?" "Most days. And the other days?" "I fake it until the day's over," Caleb smiled. "That's all any of us do." "Somehow I doubt that." "You'd be surprised." He left. Eliza sat there, feeling Skye's weight in her arms, and thought about how much had changed in 4 months. She'd arrived with nothing. Now she had a job, a room, a baby, and something that felt dangerously close to a home. The first calf was born on a Tuesday. Eliza heard the commotion from the kitchen, voices shouting, boots running. She left Skye with Martha and went to see what was happening. The barn was chaos. A heifer, young, first-time mother, was lying on her side in the birthing stall, eyes rolling. The calf was coming wrong, backwards. Tom and Caleb were on their knees in the straw, trying to turn it. "Pull when I say," Tom ordered. Caleb gripped the calf's legs. "Now!" They pulled. The heifer screamed. The calf came free in a rush of fluid and blood. It lay still. Too still. Tom grabbed a piece of straw and tickled the calf's nose. Nothing. He rubbed its chest, its sides. Nothing. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, you little bastard." Caleb grabbed a bucket of water and splashed it over the calf's head. It jerked, coughed, took a breath. Everyone in the barn let out a collective exhale. The heifer struggled to her feet, turning to nose her baby. The calf blinked up at her, confused but alive. "That was close," one of the hands said. "Too close," Tom agreed. Caleb stood, covered in birth fluids and mud, and saw Eliza watching from the doorway. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I wanted to see." "It's not pretty." "I just watched you save a life. That's pretty enough." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, just nodded. The calving season lasted 3 weeks. Some births were easy, some were nightmares. By the end, everyone was exhausted and the barn smelled like a slaughterhouse, but they'd only lost 1 calf and no mothers. Tom called it a win. Caleb called it luck. Martha called them both idiots and made a celebratory dinner. That night, after everyone had eaten and the hands had gone to bed, Eliza found Caleb sitting on the porch with a glass of whiskey. She sat down beside him. "You should be proud," she said. "Of what?" "All of it. The calving, the ranch, what you've built here." "I didn't build it, just kept it running." "That's the same thing." "Not really." They sat in silence for a while. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled salt. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said. Sure. Why'd you let me stay? That first day you could have sent me away. Why didn't you? Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Because you reminded me of Emma. Eliza's chest tightened. How? The way you looked at me. Like you didn't need saving, but wouldn't say no to a hand up. Emma was like that, stubborn, proud. Wouldn't ask for help even when she needed it. Sounds like you have a type. Maybe. Another silence. Then Caleb said, You scare me, Eliza. Why? Because I'm starting to care about you and Sky, and I can't. He stopped, swallowed. I can't lose anyone else. Eliza reached over and took his hand. You won't, she said. You can't promise that. I can try. He looked at her, really looked at her. What are we doing? He asked. I don't know. We should figure it out. Yeah, we should. But neither of them moved. They just sat there, holding hands, watching the stars. And for the first time in a long time, Eliza let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this. Deserved him. Deserved a future that looked like something other than survival. The next morning, everything felt different. Not in any obvious way. The sun rose same as always. The hands filed into the kitchen for breakfast. Martha made her biscuits and complained about the weather. But something had shifted between Eliza and Caleb, some invisible line crossed that neither of them could uncross. He caught her eye across the kitchen and held it for a second longer than necessary. She felt her face heat and looked away. Martha noticed. Of course she did. You two done dancing around each other yet? She asked when the hands had left. I don't know what you're talking about, Eliza said. Sure you don't. We're figuring things out. Martha snorted. What's to figure out? You like him. He likes you. Everything else is just noise. It's not that simple. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, fixing Eliza with that look that said she was about to dispense wisdom, whether Eliza wanted it or not. Nothing worth having is simple, but you make it more complicated than it needs to be, and you'll both end up miserable. She paused. Life's short, Eliza. Take the good when it comes, because it doesn't come often enough. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons why this was complicated, why rushing into anything would be stupid, why she needed to protect herself and Sky, why she couldn't afford to trust that good things would last. But Martha had already moved on to the next task, humming that tuneless melody that drove Eliza crazy. The conversation was over. Spring settled over the valley like a blessing. The snow melted, running off the mountains in silver streams that swelled the creek until it sang. The grass turned green. Not just green, but alive, vibrant, like the whole earth was waking up hungry. Wildflowers erupted across the pastures in riots of color. Purple lupine and yellow balsam root, and Indian paintbrush, the color of fire. Sky was 3 months old now, growing at a rate that seemed impossible. Every week she looked different, more alert, more present. She'd started smiling, real smiles, not just gas, and making sounds that weren't quite words but weren't quite babbling either. Her eyes, which had been that newborn gray-blue, were settling into something darker, brown, like Eliza's. Danny insisted she'd said his name last week. She said, Da. That's close enough. That's not your name, Eliza pointed out for the third time that day. It's the beginning of my name. It's a sound babies make. It doesn't mean anything. You're just jealous she likes me better. Tom, passing by with a saddle slung over his shoulder, said, She doesn't like anybody better. She's 3 months old. She doesn't have preferences yet. 4, Danny corrected. 3, Eliza and Tom said together. Danny sulked off to do whatever work he'd been avoiding, muttering about people who didn't appreciate linguistic development when they heard it. Caleb watched the exchange from the doorway, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. He's going to be insufferable when she actually does start talking, he said. He's already insufferable, Eliza replied. True. Caleb crossed to where Sky was lying on a blanket on the floor, staring up at the ceiling like it held the secrets of the universe. He knelt down beside her. Hey, little miss. Sky's eyes tracked to his face. She kicked her legs, made a sound that was half coo, half squawk. Yeah, I know. Exciting stuff up there on that ceiling. He reached out and she grabbed his finger, holding on with surprising strength for something so small. Eliza watched them, feeling something warm and terrifying expand in her chest. This was dangerous. Not the situation, the feeling. The way her heart did something stupid and reckless every time she saw Caleb with Sky. The way she'd started thinking in terms of we instead of I. The way the ranch had stopped feeling like a temporary stop and started feeling permanent. Like maybe she could stay. Like maybe she deserved to stay. She'd learned not to count on permanence. It was a hard lesson to unlearn. That afternoon, she was hanging laundry when a wagon came up the drive. Not Mrs. Miller this time. Someone Eliza didn't recognize. A man in his 40s with graying hair and a nervous energy that set her on edge immediately. He wore a suit that was too nice for ranch work, shoes that had never seen mud. City person. Never a good sign. He climbed down and approached the porch where Caleb was reviewing supply orders with Tom. "Mr. Rourke?" Caleb looked up. "Yeah?" "My name's Harris, James Harris. I'm a lawyer from Denver." Tom and Caleb exchanged glances. The kind that said, "Here we go." "What can I do for you?" Caleb asked, setting down his papers. Harris pulled a folded document from his coat pocket with the self-importance of someone who thought paper could solve everything. "I represent a client who's interested in purchasing your property." Silence. The kind that stretched and grew teeth. Then Caleb said, "It's not for sale. My client's prepared to make a very generous offer. Perhaps we could discuss." "Still not for sale. You haven't heard the number yet." "Don't need to. This land's not going anywhere." Harris looked around the ranch, taking in the house, the barn, the sprawling pastures with an appraising eye that made Eliza's skin crawl, like he was already carving it up in his mind, deciding which pieces were worth the most. "My client believes this property has significant development potential. With the railroad expansion planned for next year, this entire valley could be worth 10 times what it is now. Prime location for a new town. Hotels, shops, residential development." I said no. "Mr. Rourke, if you'd just consider the financial..." "No means no. Now get off my land." Harris's expression hardened. The polite veneer cracked just enough to show what was underneath. "You're making a mistake. My client doesn't take rejection well." "That sounds like his problem, not mine." "It'll become your problem if you're not careful." Caleb stood up slowly. Didn't raise his voice, didn't move closer, just stood there looking at Harris like he was something stuck to the bottom of his boot. "That a threat?" Harris backpedaled immediately. "Of course not. I'm simply advising you that..." "You're advising me to leave, Tom?" The foreman stepped inside the barn and came back out holding a rifle, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it, casual-like. "Show Mr. Harris to the road," Caleb said. Tom nodded. "Happy to." The lawyer stood there for another moment, like he was weighing whether to push harder, like he was calculating odds and coming up empty. Then he pocketed the paper and climbed back onto his wagon stiffly. "You'll regret this," he called over his shoulder. "My client has resources, connections. You can't fight progress, Mr. Rourke." "I'll take my chances." The wagon rolled away, kicking up dust. After it had disappeared down the drive, Tom lowered the rifle. "Who do you think sent him?" "Miller, probably. Or someone like him." Caleb crumpled the supply order in his fist. "They've been trying to run me out for years. This is just the latest attempt. Railroad expansion means money, and money makes people do stupid things. You think they'll try something else?" "Count on it." Eliza had stopped hanging laundry, listening to the exchange with growing unease. When Caleb noticed her watching, he walked over. "You heard that?" he asked. "Most of it? Who's trying to buy the ranch?" "Doesn't matter. I'm not selling." "Even for a lot of money?" "Even for that." "Why not? You could start over somewhere else, somewhere safer." Caleb looked out of the valley, at the land that rolled away in every direction. "Because this is mine. Emma and I built this from nothing, cleared these fields, built that house, raised cattle when everyone said the land was too poor, and I'm not handing it over to some developer who wants to carve it into pieces and sell it off to people who'll never understand what it took to make it work." "What if they make things difficult?" "Let them try." But Eliza could see the worry in his eyes, the way his jaw was set too tight, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The trouble started 2 weeks later. Small things at first. Easy to dismiss as bad luck or coincidence if you weren't paying attention. But Eliza was paying attention. A fence cut during the night, letting a dozen head of cattle wander onto the main road. Tom found them at dawn, scattered across 2 miles, one nearly hit by a passing wagon. Supplies ordered from town but never delivered. The shopkeeper claiming confusion about the address, even though they'd been delivering to the ranch for years. A hand quitting without notice, saying he'd found better work in town, then showing up 2 days later asking for his job back, admitting someone had paid him to leave and he'd realized too late it was a setup. Then bigger things. Someone poisoned the creek. Just a small section, but enough to sicken 3 horses before Tom noticed and moved them to fresh water. They survived, but it was close. Too close. A fire broke out in the hay barn one night, caught early enough to contain, but not before it destroyed half the winter stores. The hands managed to save most of the structure, but the message was clear. We can get to you. Accidents, technically, but too many to be coincidence. Tom hired extra men to patrol at night. Caleb started sleeping in the barn, rifle within reach. And Eliza. Eliza kept Skye close. One hand always on the cradle when she slept, ears tuned to every sound outside. She'd wake at the smallest noise, a horse whinnying, the wind rattling a shutter, footsteps in the yard that turned out to be one of the patrol. She was exhausted. They all were. One night in late May, she woke to shouting. Not the usual night sounds, not the patrol's changing shift. This was different, panicked. She grabbed Skye and ran to the window. Fire. Not the hay barn this time, the main barn. The one they'd just finished rebuilding. Flames licking up the sides, smoke pouring from the roof in thick black columns that blotted out the stars. Eliza's blood turned to ice. The horses. All of them were in there. She handed Skye to Martha, who'd appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, eyes wide. "Keep her inside," Eliza said. "Where are you?" But Eliza was already running. The yard was chaos. Men running with buckets from the pump. Someone working the handle so hard it looked like it might break. Caleb and Tom throwing open the barn doors, trying to get the animals out before the whole structure came down. A horse burst through the opening, eyes white with terror, foam on its flanks. It nearly trampled Danny in its panic. Another followed, and another. But there were more inside. Eliza could hear them screaming, that high-pitched sound horses make when they're truly terrified, a sound that cuts through everything else. She ran toward the barn. "Eliza, no!" Tom's voice sharp with fear. She ignored him. The smoke hit her like a wall, thick and black and choking, full of burning hay and wood and something chemical that made her eyes water instantly. She pulled her nightgown over her mouth and pushed forward, bent low where the air was clearer. Or less deadly, anyway. A horse was trapped in the far stall, tangled in a broken gate that must have come loose when it panicked. It was throwing itself against the walls, making sounds no animal should make. Blood streaked its flanks where the wood had splintered. Eliza grabbed the gate and pulled. It didn't budge. She braced her foot against the stall wall and pulled harder. Something gave. The gate swung open and the horse bolted past her, knocking her into the wall hard enough to make stars burst behind her eyes. Pain exploded across her shoulder, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. There was one more. The old mare, Juniper. The one she'd helped all those months ago with the stone in her hoof. The mare was down, overcome by smoke, flanks heaving with the effort of breathing. Her eyes rolled, showing white. "Come on," Eliza gasped, dropping to her knees beside the animal. "Get up. Please get up." Juniper didn't move. Eliza grabbed her halter and pulled. The mare was too heavy, too big, like trying to move a mountain. She pulled harder, throwing all her weight into it. Nothing. Above them, the roof groaned. A beam cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Arms wrapped around Eliza from behind, hauling her backward. "We have to go!" Caleb's voice in her ear, rough with smoke and fear. "The horse! She's gone! No, we can't just—" But he was dragging her toward the door, the fire closing in from all sides, the heat unbearable. The air itself felt like it was burning. They burst into the night air and Eliza collapsed, coughing so hard she thought her lungs would tear apart. Each breath was razors. Each cough brought up black phlegm. Caleb knelt beside her, hands on her shoulders, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Are you insane?" he shouted. Not angry, terrified. "You could have died in there." The horse, is not worth your life. Nothing in there is worth your life. Behind them, the barn collapsed with a sound like thunder. The roof caved in, sending up a shower of sparks that looked like falling stars. The walls followed, folding inward with a finality that made Eliza's chest ache. She stared at the burning wreckage and felt something inside her shatter. Juniper was gone. They'd saved most of the other horses, but not all. They'd lost 6 in total. The ones they saved were traumatized, skittish, some injured from their panic or the smoke. They'd survive, but they'd never be the same. The barn was gone. Again. All that work, all those hours, ashes. And Tom had found evidence in the morning light. A can of kerosene hidden in the bushes near the back wall, still half full. Someone had been sloppy, or wanted to send a message. This wasn't an accident. This was arson. This was war. The sheriff came the next day, a tired man in his 50s named Peterson who took statements and made sympathetic noises but didn't seem particularly interested in actually investigating. He stood in the ruins of the barn, towing at charred wood with his boot, like he was examining something mildly interesting rather than a crime scene. Could have been anyone, he said. It was someone with a grudge, Caleb replied, his voice flat, controlled. The kind of control that came from barely holding back fury. You got proof? The kerosene can. Peterson shrugged. Could have been there for months. Could have been left by one of your hands. Hell, could have been kids playing around. It wasn't. Maybe. Maybe not. Without witnesses, there's not much I can do. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. So someone can just burn down my property and you'll do nothing? That's what you're telling me? I'm doing what I can with what I've got, Mr. Rourke. Peterson's tone suggested he'd had this conversation before and was tired of it. I'll file a report. Keep an eye out. But unless you've got names or someone saw something, my hands are tied. Your hands are tied because you don't want to untie them. Peterson's expression hardened. Careful now. Or what? You'll arrest me for asking you to do your job? I'm doing my job. Maybe if you weren't so quick to make enemies. I didn't make enemies. I refused to sell my land to vultures. That's your right. Just as it's my right to prioritize cases where I've got actual evidence. Peterson tipped his hat, the gesture mocking. If anything else happens, let me know. I'll add it to the file. Then he left. Caleb stood in the ruins of his barn, shoulders rigid, jaw so tight it looked painful. Tom stood beside him, silent, waiting. Finally, Caleb said, "They're not going to stop." "No, they're not." "So what do we do?" Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We rebuild, and we make it clear we're not going anywhere, that we'll rebuild as many times as it takes. And if they keep coming, then we make them regret it." Over the next month, they did exactly that. The hands worked 16-hour days clearing debris and laying new foundations. Caleb hired a crew from 2 towns over, men who didn't know about the trouble and didn't care when they heard. Work was work. Money was money. And slowly, painfully slowly, a new barn began to take shape. Bigger than the old one, stronger, like they were building a monument to stubbornness. Eliza helped where she could, though Martha and Caleb both insisted she focus on Skye. But at night, after the baby was asleep and Martha had gone to bed, she'd slip out and work alongside the men, hauling boards, holding nails, doing whatever needed doing. Nobody told her she couldn't. Nobody dared. One evening, she and Caleb were working late, the others having collapsed into their bunks hours ago. They were installing the last of the roof beams, working by lantern light that threw long shadows across the skeleton of the structure. "Hand me that hammer," Caleb said from up on the ladder. Eliza passed it over. He drove a nail home with 3 solid strikes, tested the beam. Satisfied, he climbed down. "That's it for tonight," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "We could finish the south wall. We could also get some sleep." "Sleep's overrated." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. "You've been running yourself into the ground. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "When's the last time you did?" "That's different." "How?" "Because this is my fight." "It's mine too." "No, I live here, Caleb. I work here. My daughter's growing up here. That makes it my fight just as much as yours." He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" Act like you're part of this when you could leave anytime you wanted. You've got money saved now, skills, references. You could go anywhere, start over somewhere safe, somewhere nobody's trying to burn you out. The words hit harder than they should have. You want me to leave? Eliza asked quietly. That's not what I said. Then what are you saying? Caleb ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up in all directions. I'm saying I don't understand why you're still here. Why you'd choose this mess over peace. Why you'd risk yourself in Sky for a piece of land and a stubborn man who brings you nothing but trouble. This is safe. Someone tried to burn down my barn with you sleeping 50 yards away. And we're still here. We're still standing. That's what safe means. Not that nothing bad happens, but that when it does, you survive it. For how long, Eliza? How long before something worse happens? Before someone gets hurt? Before... He stopped, jaw working. Before I lose someone else? There it was. The real fear. Eliza stepped closer to him, close enough to smell smoke and sweat and the sawdust clinging to his clothes. I'm not leaving, she said. Not because I can't, because I don't want to. She took a breath. This is the first place I've felt like I belong in years, maybe ever. The first place I felt like I was building something instead of just surviving. And I'm not giving that up because some cowards are trying to scare us away. Caleb's expression shifted, softened. You're terrifying, you know that? Good. I'd hate to be predictable. You're the furthest thing from predictable I've ever met. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand rough with calluses, but gentle. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, lingering. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. I can't lose you. Then don't let me go. He kissed her. Soft at first. Tentative. Like he was asking permission he hadn't worked up the courage to voice. Eliza answered by kissing him back, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some sweeping romantic moment out of a story. Their lips were chapped from sun and wind. They both tasted like smoke and exhaustion and the cheap coffee Tom made that was more dirt than bean, but it was real. And real was better than perfect. Real was something you could hold on to. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. What are we doing? He asked. I still don't know. We should probably figure it out. Probably. But neither of them moved. They just stood there in the half-finished barn, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a world that kept trying to knock them down. And maybe they were. The barn was finished by mid-June. The town held a dance to celebrate. Not for Caleb specifically, but for the valley as a whole. Spring planting was done. Calving season was over. The worst of the trouble seemed to have passed, or at least gone quiet. People were ready to let loose. Martha insisted Eliza go. You've been working yourself to death for 2 months straight. Go have fun for once. I don't have anything to wear. Wear a dress, any dress. It's a barn dance, not a coronation. What about Sky? I'll watch her. Martha. Go, dance, drink something that isn't coffee, be young, remember what that feels like. So Eliza went. She borrowed a dress from Mrs. Miller, who'd become something like a friend over the past months, stopping by with supplies and gossip and occasional help with Sky. The dress was simple but pretty, pale blue with white flowers embroidered around the collar. Eliza barely recognized herself in it. The dance was held in Miller's barn, ironic, given everything. And by the time Eliza arrived, it was already in full swing. Music from a fiddle and guitar, the players sawing away with more enthusiasm than skill, people spinning and laughing and stomping to keep time, the smell of beer and hay and summer heat. Eliza stood at the edge, feeling conspicuous. Like everyone was looking at her, even though most people weren't. Then Caleb appeared beside her, cleaned up in a way she'd never seen. Hair combed, shirt pressed, boots actually polished. You came, he said. Martha made me. Remind me to thank her. He looked her up and down. You look nice. You sound surprised. I'm not, just, you look different, good different. You clean up pretty well yourself. Don't get used to it. He held out his hand. Want to get out of here? We just got here. I know, but there's something I want to show you. She took his hand. They slipped out the back and walked through the warm night toward the creek. The music faded behind them until it was just the sound of water over stones and crickets and their footsteps in the grass. Caleb led her to a spot where the creek widened into a pool, the surface reflecting the stars. Cottonwood trees hung overhead, leaves whispering in the breeze. This was Emma's favorite place, he said quietly. She used to come here when she needed to think, when the house got too loud or I got too stubborn or she just needed space. Eliza's chest tightened. Caleb, I want you to know about her, about them, because you're part of my life now and they were part of who I am, and I don't want there to be secrets between us. So he told her about how he and Emma had met at a harvest dance when they were barely 20, about how she'd turned him down the first 3 times he asked to court her, about their wedding on a snowy December morning, about Sarah's birth, difficult and terrifying and the best day of his life, about the plans they'd made for the ranch, for their future, a bigger house, more children, maybe horses for breeding instead of just work, about the fever that took them both in less than a week, about coming home from town to find Emma in bed, burning up, about Sarah crying in her cradle, already showing signs of the same sickness, about the 4 days he spent watching them slip away while the doctor shook his head and said there was nothing to be done, about the 3 years he spent afterward just going through the motions, working because work needed doing, eating because his body required it, sleeping when exhaustion finally dragged him under, not really living, just existing. And then you showed up, he said, his voice rough. This stubborn, impossible woman who wouldn't take no for an answer, who looked at my closed gate and my closed face and decided neither of those things was her problem. I was desperate. You were determined. There's a difference. He turned to face her. You reminded me what it felt like to care about something, someone. And I fought it for so long because I was terrified of losing anyone else, terrified of caring that much again and having it ripped away. And now? Now I'm still terrified, but I'm more scared of not trying, of spending the rest of my life safe and alone and wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to take the risk. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to do this. I've never been good at letting people in, at trusting that good things won't get taken away. Neither have I. We'll figure it out together, make all the mistakes together instead of separately. What if we screw it up? Then we'll screw it up together too, and we'll fix it, or we won't. But at least we'll have tried. She laughed, wet and shaky, and he pulled her into his arms. They stood there by the creek for a long time, just holding each other, listening to the water and the night sounds and the distant music from the dance. Then Caleb said, "Marry me." Eliza pulled back to look at his face. What? Marry me. Make this official. Make you and Sky mine in every way that matters. Caleb, I know it's fast. I know there's 100 reasons to wait, but I don't want to wait. I've spent 3 years waiting for my life to start again, and I'm tired of it. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine, and I'm yours, and Sky has a father who will protect her with everything he has. You really want this? All of it? The mess and the complications, and a woman with a past she won't talk about? I want you, however you come, whatever that means. Eliza looked at him, this broken, beautiful man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd seen past the pregnancy and the whispers to the person underneath, who taught her that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was try. Yes, she said. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. I'll make you coffee in the mornings and argue with you about fence repairs and raise our daughter. Her voice caught. Our daughter. And I'll try my best not to be terrified every single day that it'll all fall apart. He kissed her, deeper this time, like he was trying to memorize the shape of her mouth, the taste of her, the way she fit against him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he said, "We should get back before people start talking. Let them talk." Good point, he grinned. Besides, they've been talking for months anyway. Might as well give them something to really gossip about. They walked back hand in hand, and when they entered the barn, several people noticed, nudged their neighbors, started whispering. Caleb just pulled Eliza onto the dance floor and held her close while the fiddle played something slow and sweet. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza let herself feel happy, not cautiously optimistic, not guardedly hopeful, just happy. The wedding was small, just the ranch hands, Martha, Mrs. Miller, and a handful of people from town who'd proven themselves decent over the past months, people who'd brought supplies after the fire, who'd stood up to Miller when he tried to stir up trouble, who'd shown that not everyone in Blackidge was content to judge and condemn. The ceremony took place in the new barn, Caleb's idea. Something about building a future where they'd built everything else. About making new memories in a space that had seen too much destruction. Eliza wore a simple dress that Mrs. Miller had helped her make from fabric they'd bought in town, white with tiny yellow flowers. Nothing fancy, but it fit well and made her feel pretty in a way she hadn't felt in years. Caleb wore his best shirt and looked uncomfortable in a way that made Eliza want to laugh and kiss him in equal measure. Tom officiated, reading from a book of common marriage vows that he butchered so badly, Danny started giggling halfway through, but nobody minded. The words didn't have to be perfect. They just had to be true. And they were. When Caleb slipped a simple gold band onto Eliza's finger, his mother's ring he'd told her quietly the night before, and said, "I'm yours, for as long as you'll have me," his voice shook. And when Eliza replied, "Forever then, however long that is," she meant every word. They kissed. The hands cheered. Sky, held by Martha, made a sound that might have been approval or hunger or just random baby noise, but they chose to interpret it as approval. And just like that, Eliza Hart became Eliza Rourke. The woman no one wanted had a name that meant something, had a place that was hers, had a family. The trouble with Miller and whoever was backing him didn't stop immediately. There were more incidents over the following weeks, more threats, more attempts at sabotage. But each time the ranch weathered it, and each time more people from town showed up to help. Mrs. Miller brought food and stayed to help cook for the hands. The blacksmith fixed equipment for free. 2 families sent their teenage sons to help with repairs, refusing payment. The tide was turning, slowly, incrementally, but turning. And when someone spray-painted threats on the side of Miller's general store in the middle of the night, crude words about minding his own business, it was the townspeople who caught the culprit, Miller's own son, a young man named Robert who'd been behind most of the sabotage, trying to drive down property values so his father could buy land cheap, planning to sell it all when the railroad came through and make a fortune. When the truth came out, presented at a town meeting with witnesses and evidence, Miller lost more than money. He lost his standing, his reputation, everything he'd built on the backs of fear and manipulation. The town council forced him to step down. Several families stopped shopping at his store. And the ranch, Caleb's ranch, Eliza's ranch, became the heart of something new. A place where people were judged by what they did, not where they came from or what mistakes they'd made. Where hard work and decency counted for more than reputation or money. Where someone like Eliza could build a life. The ranch grew. Caleb and Tom expanded the herd, buying good breeding stock from a ranch in Montana. Built new pastures, hired more hands, some of them young men from town looking for honest work, some of them drifters like Eliza had been, looking for a place to belong. And Eliza took over the business side. Turned out she had a head for numbers, for seeing patterns and inefficiencies that the men had never noticed. She reorganized the books, renegotiated contracts with buyers, found ways to save money without cutting quality. She set up accounts with 3 different buyers instead of 1, so they'd never be dependent on a single market. She negotiated better prices for feed by buying in bulk with 2 other ranches. She even convinced Caleb to start breeding horses, good ones, the kind people paid premium prices for. Within a year, the ranch was more profitable than it had been in a decade. "You're a terror," Caleb said one night, watching her work through a stack of invoices at the kitchen table. "I prefer efficient." "That too. But also terrifying. You make Tom look soft." "Tom is soft. He just hides it well." Caleb laughed and kissed the top of her head. "What would I do without you? Slowly go bankrupt while being very noble about it." Probably accurate. Sky was 2 now, walking, talking, getting into everything with the determined curiosity of someone who'd inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's. Eliza still caught herself thinking that, and it still made her chest tight. Focus. She'd started calling Caleb Papa without anyone teaching her. The first time it happened, Caleb had frozen mid-step like someone had punched him. Sky had been sitting on the floor playing with wooden blocks, and she'd looked up at him and said clear as day, "Papa up?" wanting to be picked up. Caleb had just stood there with this expression on his face like his heart was breaking and mending at the same time. Then he'd picked her up and held her so tight, Sky had protested, squirming. Eliza had watched from the kitchen doorway, crying. Happy tears, the kind she'd never thought she'd get to cry. 3 years after Eliza first walked up to Caleb's gate, the ranch held its first annual summer gathering. It had been Tom's idea, actually, a celebration of the community they'd built. Not just the ranch, but the valley, the people who'd chosen to stay and fight for something better instead of letting fear and greed carve everything into pieces. Tables were set up in the yard. Food covered every surface. Martha had been cooking for days, and half the town had brought dishes. Music played, a proper band this time with a fiddle and guitar, and even a piano someone had hauled out on a wagon. Children ran wild while parents tried half-heartedly to corral them. Eliza stood on the porch, watching it all, with Sky on her hip. The little girl was getting heavy, too big to carry around like this much longer, but Eliza wasn't ready to let her down just yet. "Pretty good turnout," Martha said, appearing beside her with a glass of lemonade. "Better than I expected. People like what you've done here, like what you represent." "Which is what?" Martha took a sip of her drink. "Proof that starting over is possible, that you can build something good out of nothing, that where you come from matters less than where you're going." Eliza looked at her. "I didn't do this alone." "No, but you started it. You walked up to that gate with nothing and refused to leave until you'd built something worth keeping, and people noticed. They're still noticing." Caleb appeared, sweaty and smiling from whatever game the hands had roped him into. His shirt was untucked, his hair sticking up in all directions. "You need to come settle something," he said. "What now?" "Danny says Sky's first word was his name. I say it was Papa. We need a tiebreaker." "Her first word was no," Eliza said. "That doesn't count." "It absolutely counts. She said it 17 times the day she learned it." Caleb grinned and scooped Sky out of her arms, tossing her in the air. The little girl shrieked with laughter, her curls bouncing. "Careful," Eliza said automatically. "I got her." And he did. He always did. That night, after everyone had gone home and the yard had been cleaned and Sky was asleep, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch together. The air was cooling finally, after a day of blistering heat. The sky was clear, stars scattered across it like someone had spilled salt. "You ever think about what would have happened if I'd said no that first day?" Caleb asked. "Sometimes." "Where would you have gone?" "I don't know, somewhere else. Another town, another ranch. I would have figured it out." "I'm glad I didn't make you." Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. An owl hooting somewhere in the cottonwoods, the creek murmuring, a horse nickering in the corral. Then Caleb said, "I love you." He didn't say it often, wasn't the type to throw words around carelessly, which made it mean something when he did. "I love you too," Eliza said. And she meant it, not because he'd saved her, he hadn't. She'd saved herself. But because he'd given her space to do it, had given her a chance when no one else would, had seen her not as a problem to solve but as a person to know, had taught her that home wasn't something you found, it was something you built, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one refusal to quit at a time. 5 years later, Eliza stood in the same spot she'd stood that first morning, at Caleb's gate, looking at the ranch spread out before her. But everything was different now. The house had been expanded. A second story added to accommodate the 2 more children who'd come after Sky, a boy named Jesse and another girl named Emma, after Caleb's first wife. Eliza had suggested the name, and Caleb had cried. The barn gleamed at the morning light, rebuilt better and stronger than before. The pastures were full of healthy livestock, cattle and horses both, some of the best breeding stock in 3 counties. And the kitchen, her kitchen, was the heart of an operation that fed not just the ranch, but half the valley. Martha had officially retired, but still came by most days, claiming she was bored at home. Eliza suspected she just liked bossing people around, and the ranch was the only place that still tolerated it. Tom had gotten married to a widow from town. They had a little house on the eastern edge of the property. Danny had married too, surprisingly, to a girl from Denver who'd come to visit family and decided to stay. They had twin boys who were already showing signs of being as chatty as their father. The ranch employed 20 hands now, some with families of their own. There was talk of building more houses, creating a real community. It had become more than a business, more than a ranch. It had become proof that different was possible, that you could build something that lasted. That strength came not from perfection, but from persistence. Sky was 7 now, in the yard teaching Jessie how to ride. She sat tall in the saddle, confident, calling out instructions like she'd been born doing this. Maybe she had been. Caleb was with them, close enough to catch Jessie if he fell but far enough back to let him try, always balancing protection with freedom. It was something he'd gotten good at over the years. Emma was on the porch with a book, pretending to read but really watching her siblings. She was quieter than the others, more thoughtful. Reminded Eliza of Caleb in a way that made her ache sometimes. This was her life now, these people, this place, this impossible, imperfect, beautiful thing she'd built from nothing. Caleb appeared beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come." "We?" "Yeah, we." He kissed the top of her head. "You ever regret it, staying here, marrying a stubborn fool who brings you nothing but trouble?" Eliza looked at the ranch, at the life they'd built, at their children playing in the yard, at the community gathering for dinner tonight, because they did that now, once a month, everyone bringing food and stories and laughter. "Not once," she said, and she meant it, because this, all of this, was hers. Not because someone had given it to her, because she'd earned it, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one refusal to quit at a time. She'd arrived at this gate with nothing but a canvas bag and a belly full of shame and a stubborn refusal to disappear just because the world wanted her to. Now she stood here with everything that mattered: a home, a family, a purpose. Proof that the people who told her she was worthless had been wrong. Proof that starting over wasn't just possible, it was worth it. Proof that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was show up and refuse to leave until you'd built something worth staying for. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple, the kind of sunset that made you stop and stare because beauty like that didn't last. But this would last, not because it was perfect, but because they'd fight for it, because they'd built it strong enough to weather the storms, because they'd learned that home wasn't about the absence of trouble. It was about the presence of people worth fighting for. "Come on," Caleb said, tugging her toward the house. "Dinner's almost ready. The kids are hungry, and if we don't feed Danny soon, he'll start complaining." Eliza laughed and let herself be pulled forward, toward the light, toward the voices, toward home. And as she crossed the threshold with Caleb's hand in hers, and her children's laughter echoing through the house, she thought, this is what winning looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and worth every scar it took to get here.